So Caleb Downs on his podcast decided to talk about the Indiana game a little bit as they were interviewing Carnell Tate. And, he didn't necessarily bring it up and make it a segment or anything like that, but his brother, Josh Downs, who he does the podcast with, decided to ask Caleb, hey, do you think you would have beat Indiana if you played them again? I'm going to play the clip for you of the podcast, and then we'll talk about it.
Had another shot at Indiana, would y'all win?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe.
Why you put your hand up like that?
No, I'm just saying maybe.
Yes.
No, maybe. That's what I'm saying. Who knows, though?
So there you go. That was Josh Downs asking the question to Caleb Downs and Carnell Tate, saying, hey, if you played again, would you win? Now, obviously, Indiana and Ohio State, they played in the Big Ten championship game, 13-10. It was one of the closest games of the season for Indiana. Obviously, Indiana had the Iowa game, the Penn State game that were also very close. The Oregon game was probably closer. The first Oregon game was probably a little bit closer than maybe the score indicated there because Indiana did begin to pull away at the end there. But still, regardless, that was a 10-point game, double-digit win for Indiana. And on the road, it's impressive. I'm obviously not taking anything away from Indiana. 16-0 national champions. You can't take anything away from them. So, but Josh Downs, he asked the questions, if y'all had another shot at Indiana, would y'all win? And I think it's important to recognize that this was not, like a prompted segment or anything like that. I do think that, Caleb Downs, he's still holding a little bit of his SEC in him a little bit with these hypothetical matchups and saying he's going to win. I'm kidding. Ohio State fans, chill out. All right. But I do think, what else is he supposed to say? Indiana fans, they found this on social media. And don't get me wrong, if I was an Indiana fan, I'd be right there, tweeting it back at him and saying, oh, yeah, if you had another hypothetical matchup, yada, yada, yada. I'd be right there with them as well. Of course, you know me, I'm an Ohio State fan. But at the end of the day, there is stuff that gets said that bothers me. But, Caden Curry after the Miami game saying, we would beat them 9 out of 10 times or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you didn't. So congratulations. You screwed that one up. Now, I think the difference between the Indiana game and the Miami game is, well, first off, I think, what is Caleb Downs and Carnell Tate supposed to say here? No? If they say no, I think, Ohio State fans might burn down Columbus. I know these guys are up to the NFL at this point, but you're a competitor. You're somebody that's obviously very much so believes in yourself, believes in your teammates. They're not going to say no. So that's first and foremost here. Number two, it would have been different if it was bringing it up as a segment to talk about it or something like that. Oh, we would have beat this team if we played 9 out of 10 times. But let's talk about it. But would the game look different a second time? We thought maybe it could with Oregon. It looked different, all right, different as in Indiana destroyed them. But, that was also a game where, Indiana got off to a hot start, the interception, and they got an interception in the other game as well. But they got off to a hot start, interception, scored right away. Oregon had some issues with running backs and stuff like that. So I don't think it's a like-for-like comparison. The game that honestly I look for more to say would the Indiana and Ohio State game be different is the Ohio State-Miami game, because a lot of the same issues that you saw for Ohio State in that Indiana game were similar issues that you saw against Miami. And then obviously Indiana, they take care of business. They beat Miami. They win the national championship. And then that begs the question of, did Ohio State lose the game or did Indiana win the game? And it's important to recognize this question, because if you say Ohio State lost the game, then you're not giving enough credit to Indiana. And if you say that Indiana won the game, then you're making it sound like Ohio State, put on the best show that they could. And so it's probably a little bit of both. I lean more toward Indiana won the game, because I think in the clutch moments and the clutch plays, what they had to get is what they did get. But at the same time, you had some plays in that game like the Julian Sayin sneak, right? Julian Sayin, if he just snuck that ball and he would have stayed upright, he almost kind of fell down a little bit and wasn't able to convert the first down. If he stays upright and he gets that first down, is that a different game? Is it a different story? But then again, at the same time, some of the plays that Indiana made, if Indiana made that field goal, is it a different play? Is it a different game? Is it a different story? If Ohio State makes this, if that, at the end of the day, if Ohio State came out and beat Miami, I'd say that this game could have possibly been different if they played a second time. But fact is, Ohio State didn't come out and beat Miami. Miami was the better team that day. Miami was the better coach team that day. And against Indiana, Indiana was the better team that day. Indiana was the better coach team that day. And I think overall in the season, from what we saw, yeah, Ohio State, they beat teams more soundly than Indiana did. But if we're being honest, that was not the schedule that we thought it was at the beginning of the season. And so Ohio State did not play some of the top tier caliber teams that Indiana played, like in Oregon, like in Iowa. Like those are some of the top tier caliber teams that they played. I venture to say Iowa was better than Michigan last year, and that was one of the Ohio State's best wins. Texas was not a great team for Ohio State to play, and they played them at home. Indiana traveled to Iowa. So you look at the resume, you look at the way everything happened. Look, I don't like to say it. I'm an Ohio State fan. I'd love to say Ohio State would have beat Indiana. But if I'm looking at it being real, if I'm looking at it being objective, Indiana was the better team last year. So to me, that's, Caleb Downs and Carnell Tate can say, oh, yeah, we beat them all we want. But that's just more of them like being a competitor type of thing. At the end of the day, if they were to play each other at the end of the season for some reason after Ohio State lost to Miami, I'm not saying it would have been Oregon 2.0 or anything like that where, Indiana just blows them out. But I would put my money on Indiana to win that game. Heck, I put my, I put it on Indiana to win that game the first time because I thought they were the better team and I picked them to win. So overall, like, if you're an Ohio State fan, it sucks. Obviously, you'd like to win that game. If you're an Indiana fan, you get all the time in the world to be able to glow. You can talk about it all you want. We won. We took you down. But at the end of the day, like I said, Caden Curry, his thing that he said, we would have beat Miami 9 times out of 10, stuff like that. I think that would have been different. And I also think that, for Ohio State fans, they need to understand that, like, it wasn't all the offensive line in that game. Some of that was Julian Sayin and him just being a young QB as well. He saw 8-7 guys in coverage, in zone coverage sometimes back there. And so, yeah, it was on Ohio State's offensive line at times, but at other times it was also on Julian Sayin not being able to see the field. And quite frankly, maybe Ohio State's offensive line gets better, but they also had some injuries on the offensive line. So, anything can happen. I'm not saying that Indiana would have for sure won the game or anything like that, but based on the way we saw Indiana play in the playoffs, based on the experience that they had, based on everything that we saw the entire season, I don't think you could say as an Ohio State fan that you would have beat Indiana if you rematched them. Maybe if you got to the national championship and we started, thinking about it a different way because Ohio State did this against Miami, Ohio State did this against Ole Miss, maybe they come in with more momentum. But at the end of the day, Ohio State has to figure out what was up with them at the end of the season. Now they hired Arthur Smith, he should be able to help the run game out a little bit more. But overall, like, you need better offense in that situation. Ohio State had a fantastic defense last year, but you also lose a lot of that talent this coming year. So we'll see what Ohio State is. I don't agree with people saying Ohio State's the number one team in the country. I think they got to show it to me a little bit more. Honestly, like my no doubt number one team in the country is Indiana, and I think I got them there until proven otherwise. So they've got a relatively easy schedule. Obviously, not playing any Power 4 teams to begin the season next year, but even if they struggle a little bit, I'm not going to hold it against them because, shouldn't have held them against them last year either. So until Indiana loses, until they give me a reason to doubt them, I'm not going to doubt them at this point. Indiana brings back a lot of players that were starters last year on this next team. And I think they're going to have a great season next year. We'll see what Ohio State can do. We'll see what the coaching can do because at times at the end of the season, coaching failed them. Yes, the players failed too, and the other team was good. We're not taking anything away from the other team in Miami and Indiana and beating them, but the coaching failed them at times. And Ryan Day was quite frankly outcoached in both that Indiana and that Miami game. Not saying fire Ryan Day or anything like that. I'm not saying that. He's got a national championship. Obviously, he's a great coach. I think he's top 2, top 3 in the country. But still, something they need to do better at, something they got to get better. So we'll see how it goes.